Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The Great Diplomatic Hall on the crystal planet Xylos was considered the most secure location in the known galaxy. Towering spires of naturally occurring, luminescent quartz stretched toward a violet sky, casting a serene glow over the gathering of the Galactic Alliance. Inside the massive chamber, representatives from hundreds of advanced civilizations mingled, draped in shimmering energy fields and automated defense matrices. Commander Zyre, a proud and towering warrior of the Horn-Scale tribe, stood near the central dais. His golden, reptilian eyes scanned the crowd. He felt absolute confidence in the overlapping security grids. The Alliance possessed technology that could tame stars. Nothing could penetrate this fortress. Then, the very air began to scream. It was not an explosion. It was not a barrage of artillery. It was a frequency. A sudden, agonizing wave of ultrasonic destruction tore through the chamber. The Invisible Fleet, a notorious syndicate of space assassins, had bypassed every orbital sensor without triggering a single alarm. They did not use conventional lasers or kinetic projectiles. They weaponized sound itself. Zyre watched in absolute horror as the pinnacle of galactic engineering completely unraveled before his eyes. The protective energy shields surrounding the diplomats, designed to withstand the heat of a solar flare, flickered violently and shattered like brittle glass. The kinetic dampening armor worn by Zyre's elite security guard cracked open. High-capacity plasma rifles short-circuited instantly, their power cells detonating in showers of useless, blinding blue sparks. The harmonic interference of the ultrasonic weaponry turned their greatest technological achievements into deadly traps. From the shattered crystal ceiling, figures dropped into the hall like shadows woven from the void itself. The assassins wore sleek, sound-dampening armor that absorbed all light. They carried no firearms. Instead, their suits projected focused acoustic waves directly into the biological systems of everyone in the room. Zyre felt a searing, unimaginable pain drill straight into his cerebral cortex. His knees buckled. All around him, his proud, scaled warriors, veterans who had survived dozens of brutal star campaigns, dropped to the floor. They were not bleeding. There were no visible wounds, but the destructive frequencies overrode their nervous systems entirely, paralyzing them in a suffocating grip of sensory overload. Ambassadors with redundant organs and dense exoskeletons convulsed helplessly, their bodies betraying them. Zyre fought to remain standing, but his massive, heavily reinforced musculature trembled weakly against the invisible acoustic barrage. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the groans of the helpless. Amidst this landscape of chaos and utter despair, one figure remained entirely unaffected. Albert Alexander was a newly appointed diplomatic attaché representing the Earth delegation. Compared to the towering, armored aliens around him, the human appeared incredibly frail, wearing nothing but a simple, dark fabric suit. Yet, while beings of immense physical power collapsed in agony, Albert merely exhaled a slow, controlled breath. He did not panic. He did not scream for a rescue team that would never come. He did not desperately tap at a ruined personal shield generator. With deliberate, unnerving calmness, Albert reached up to his collar. He smoothly loosened his silk tie and unfastened the top button of his suit jacket. He rolled his shoulders backward, a subtle movement that seemed to awaken a dormant energy within him. He was freeing his body from restriction. A few paces away, a towering assassin marched toward the Supreme Ambassador of the Alliance. The killer raised a resonance blade. The weapon hummed with a terrifying elegance, its edge vibrating at a microscopic frequency capable of severing the molecular bonds of any known physical matter. The Supreme Ambassador, a being of immense political power, cowered on the floor, waiting for the inevitable execution. Then Albert moved to Zaire's bewildered, pain-filled eyes. The human did not seem to run. He flowed, despite possessing a heavy endoskeleton and a rigid spine. Albert's footsteps produced absolutely no sound against the debris-littered crystal floor. It was a predatory liquid glide that seemingly defied the biomechanical laws of every vertebrate species known to the Galactic Alliance. Albert slipped seamlessly into the assassin's blind spot, perfectly exploiting the narrow field of vision created by the enemy's bulky acoustic helmet. The assassin raised the glowing resonance blade high above his head, ready to strike down the ambassador. In that fleeting fraction of a second, Albert closed the final distance. He planted his left foot firmly onto the ground, rooting his stance. A sudden, violent twist of his hips generated a massive surge of kinetic energy. That force spiraled up through his torso, transferring into his shoulder, and whipping down his right arm. It was a decisive, unhesitating strike. The side of Albert's bare hand collided with a sub-millimeter gap at the base of the assassin's armored neck. It was the single weakest junction connecting the heavy helmet to the spinal plating. The impact echoed through the chamber with a sharp, sickening crack. Albert used no plasma. He deployed no energy field. He held no weapon. Yet, the assassin instantly crumpled to the ground, entirely lifeless. The resonance blade clattered uselessly across the crystal floor. The intricate neurolink of the high-tech armor had been completely severed by pure, calculated blunt force trauma. Zaire stared in absolute, paralyzing disbelief. A soft-fleshed biped from a primitive world had just neutralized a technologically invincible killer using nothing but his bare hands. The heavy titanium alloy doors of the soundproof emergency bunker slammed shut, cutting off the agonizing high-frequency wails echoing through the great diplomatic hall. Albert Alexander did not hesitate. His hands, still perfectly steady, dragged the massive frame of Commander Zaire and the trembling Supreme Ambassador across the threshold just as a second. Infinitely more destructive wave of ultrasonic bombardment pulverized the crystal architecture above them. The thick acoustic shielding of the subterranean vault swallowed the destruction, plunging them into a suffocating, dead silence. Zaire collapsed against the cold metal wall, his golden reptilian eyes wide with an emotion he had never experienced in his 3 centuries of life. Fear. But more than fear, it was absolute, mind-shattering confusion. He stared at the human. "How did you do that?" Zaire rasped. His voice was a harsh, scraping sound. He pointed a trembling, clawed finger at Albert. "Your species possesses no dermal plating. You have no cybernetic enhancements. You are comprised of soft tissue and fragile calcium deposits. That assassin wore a polycarbon alloy suit designed to withstand atmospheric re-entry. How did you shatter his cervical seal with your bare flesh?" Albert adjusted his cuffs, his demeanor remaining unnervingly placid. "I did not break his armor, Commander. I simply bypassed it." The surviving extraterrestrial diplomats huddled in the dim emergency lighting, their biological processors and secondary brains struggling to comprehend the concept. Albert stepped forward, raising his right hand. "Your civilizations rely entirely on technology to generate force. You build external machines to do the violence for you. But my people come from Earth," Albert continued, his voice echoing softly in the metallic chamber. "Earth is a high-gravity, hyper-competitive death world. We evolved without natural weapons. We had no venom, no fangs, no hardened shells. To survive against apex predators, we had to turn our own anatomy into the machine." He pointed to his shoulder, then his hip, and finally the ball of his foot. "It is about kinetic redirection and mechanical leverage. I did not use my arm to strike the assassin. I used the friction of the floor, the torque of my hips, and the rotational mass of my entire body. I channeled 100% of that compounded kinetic energy into a surface area no larger than a coin, targeting a structural flaw in his helmet joint. It is basic physics applied to biological warfare. He looked around at the terrified alien faces. We spent tens of thousands of years perfecting this, long before we split the atom. We studied the vulnerabilities of the skeletal structure. We developed disciplines. Boxing to maximize concussive orbital trauma. CLOT to manipulate center of gravity and sever joints. A cold dread settled over the surviving ambassadors. The Supreme Ambassador shivered, his bioluminescent skin dimming. For generations, the Galactic Alliance believed the newly integrated human race was merely a clever, industrial species. Now, hiding in the dark, the ancient beings realized the horrifying truth. Humanity possessed a meticulously documented history of studying how to systematically dismantle living creatures without a single piece of manufactured weaponry. They were looking at a species of apex killers disguised in tailored suits. Before the terrifying silence could settle further, a sudden hum vibrated through the bunker. The primary diagnostic terminal on the far wall flared to life, casting a harsh, green glow across Albert's face. Lines of alien syntax scrolled rapidly down the screen. Zaire forced himself upright, his heavy boots clanking against the floor plates. He approached the terminal, his slitted pupils dilating as he translated the automated diagnostic report. "By the ancestors," Zaire breathed out, the scales on his neck flaring in outrage. The planetary defense grid was not overwhelmed. The orbital dampeners were not bypassed by the invisible fleet. He turned to face the group, his expression twisting into a snarl of betrayal. They were manually deactivated. Someone broadcasted a Level 1 override code from inside the High Council chambers exactly 5 minutes before the ultrasonic strike. The ambassadors gasped in unison. A traitor, a high-ranking saboteur within their own sacred ranks, had opened the gates for the assassins. Albert stepped closer to the screen, his sharp eyes analyzing the encrypted timestamps. "It was not a random terrorist attack," Albert stated, his tone chillingly analytical. "It was a targeted extermination, and I believe my delegation was the primary target." Zaire looked at him, bewildered. "Why target the humans? Your world has barely established a military foothold in the Alliance." "Exactly," Albert replied, turning to face the commander. Next week, the human delegation was scheduled to propose the integration of our close-quarters combat doctrines into the Alliance military academies. A faction of purists and conservatives within your council views our non-mechanical warfare as a fundamental threat to their technological supremacy. An army that does not rely on blasters or energy shields cannot be disarmed. It cannot be controlled by those who manufacture the weapons. They ordered this massacre to ensure human martial arts die on this planet, buried under the rubble of a fabricated tragedy. The bunker grew painfully quiet as the true, insidious nature of the politics at play sank in. The advanced civilizations had not just been attacked. They had been manipulated by their own fear of a primal power they could not control. The heavy vibrations radiating through the titanium ceiling told Albert everything he needed to know. The assassins were using industrial plasma drills. The impenetrable bunker would become their tomb in less than 20 minutes. He turned away from the diagnostic terminal and faced the panicked diplomats. "They are cutting through the primary blast doors right now," Albert stated plainly. "Staying here is a guaranteed death sentence. Our only viable extraction route is downward." Zaire frowned, his thick brow plates furrowing. "Downward? There is nothing below us but the derelict Xylos mining network. Those caverns were abandoned centuries ago. They are unmapped, structurally unstable, and pitched in absolute darkness." "Absolute darkness is exactly what we need," Albert replied, already moving toward the emergency maintenance hatch at the back of the room. With a sharp pull, he disengaged the manual lock and hauled the heavy grate open, revealing a jagged, gaping maw that plunged into the planetary crust. A blast of freezing, damp air swept into the bunker. Move, Albert commanded. Every second we waste is a second closer to execution. Reluctantly, the group of high-ranking officials and the towering commander descended into the abyss. The temperature plummeted instantly. The air grew thin and tasted heavily of raw ozone and ancient dust. Sharp, unpolished crystal formations jutted out from the uneven walls like the teeth of a subterranean leviathan. Once the hatch was sealed shut above them, the darkness became absolute, an oppressive, suffocating weight that pressed against their eyes. Before anyone could activate a bioluminescent gland or a portable light source, Albert spoke softly from the pitch blackness. Empty your pockets. Strip off your personal comlinks, your translation earpieces, your emergency beacons, and your medical monitors. Throw them all into the chasm. The Supreme Ambassador sputtered indignantly in the dark. Are you insane? These devices are our only lifeline to the outside world. They contain distress signals. They emit electromagnetic frequencies, Albert countered, his voice lacking any trace of hesitation. The invisible fleet operates on sensory manipulation. They will not track our footprints. They will scan for artificial energy signatures. A single, active microchip is a flare fired directly into the sky. If you want to survive the next 60 minutes, you will reduce your technological footprint to absolute zero. Drop them now. The grim logic of the human survivalist forced their compliance. One by one, the faint metallic clinking of expensive communication gear echoed down the bottomless pit. They were now completely untethered from the galactic grid, stripped bare and reduced to their primal states. High above them, the heavy thud of the bunker doors breaching confirmed Albert's prediction. But the assassins did not follow them down the maintenance shaft immediately. Instead, a terrifying, rhythmic clicking echoed down the tunnels. It was a rapid, synthetic chatter, like the sound of metallic insects multiplying. Hunter drones? Zaire whispered, his heavy breathing misting in the freezing air. Worse, Albert murmured. Echolocation hounds. Fully mechanized beasts. They possess zero optical sensors. They map the environment by bouncing high-frequency sound waves off the cave walls. And they track prey by detecting thermal radiation and micro-vibrations. If you panic, they will hear your heart hammering against your ribs. The human stepped closer to the aliens, his presence felt rather than seen. Listen to me carefully. You must fight every instinct your civilized biology is screaming at you. Slow your heart rate, inhale deeply through your nose for 4 seconds. Hold it for 2 seconds. Exhale slowly through your mouth for 4 seconds. When you walk, do not strike your heel flat against the ground. Roll your weight from the outside edge of your foot to the toes. Stay on the sloped edges of the path to minimize flat surface resonance. Become ghosts. For the next 30 minutes, the tense procession crept through the jagged labyrinth. The air grew tighter, saturated with the terrifying clicking of the mechanical beasts stalking the upper galleries. The aliens struggled. Their heavy, augmented bodies were designed for paved diplomatic corridors, not the raw, punishing terrain of an unmapped cavern. Suddenly, the clicking stopped. A low, vibrating growl rumbled through the crystal floor, rattling the bones of everyone in the group. Zaire had slipped. A minor misstep had caused his massive, heat-generating frame to brush against a hyper-conductive quartz pillar, radiating a massive thermal bloom into the cold air. From the shadows ahead, a monstrous silhouette detached itself from the ceiling. It was a jagged amalgamation of black chromium and exposed synthetic muscle fibers, its head a smooth, faceless dome of sonic receivers. The hound let out a deafening screech and lunged directly at the towering commander. Zaire raised his thick arms defensively, knowing his biological strength was meaningless against the hound's kinetic deflection shielding. Energy weapons could not pierce that barrier. Flesh would only shatter against it. In the fraction of a second before the beast made contact, Albert moved. He did not intercept the attack. Instead, he sprinted perpendicularly toward the cavern wall. His boots found purchase on 2 protruding, razor-sharp amethyst stalagmites. Using the momentum of his sprint, the human ran 3 steps vertically up the uneven rock face, defying gravity for a breathtaking moment. Reaching the apex of his wall run, Albert pushed off the crystal with explosive leg power, launching himself horizontally through the pitch-black air, directly above the lunging beast. He tucked his body into a tight, aerodynamic ball, turning his entire mass into a falling projectile. As gravity pulled him down, he extended his right arm, locking his elbow into an unbreakable geometric angle. Albert came crashing down precisely onto the smooth, faceless dome of the mechanical hound. The human drove his elbow straight into the primary echolocation sensor with the compounded force of his entire falling body weight. The sheer, concentrated physical impact bypassed the kinetic shielding entirely. The shield was designed to deflect high-velocity energy blasts and wide-area explosions. Not a pinpoint. Hyper-localized blunt force strike delivered from a sheer vertical drop. The resounding crack of chromium shattering echoed violently through the cave. The beast slammed into the ground, its internal gyroscopes utterly pulverized. Sparks erupted from its crushed sensory dome as its legs twitched rapidly before going completely dead. Zaire stared at the mangled wreckage of the invincible hunter, then looked up at Albert, who was calmly brushing crystal dust from his torn trousers. The commander felt a profound paradigm shift, reorder his understanding of the universe. The human had just proven that pure, meticulously calculated physical force could shatter defenses that the most advanced plasma cannons in the galaxy could not even scratch. The jagged crystal tunnel abruptly gave way to smooth, reinforced steel. The surviving diplomats stumbled out of the cavern and into the harsh, sterile lighting of a subterranean transit hub. This was the Planetary Emergency Evacuation Station, a relic from the early colonization era. Row upon row of sleek, aerodynamic escape pods sat silently in their launch tubes, promising salvation and a direct trajectory out of the planet's atmosphere. Commander Zaire rushed to the primary control console, his massive claws flying across the holographic interface. A loud, denying buzzer echoed through the cavernous space. The launch sequence screens flashed a brilliant, unforgiving red. "They are locked," Zaire snarled, punching the bulkhead in frustration. "The entire evacuation network has been sealed under a Level 1 security directive. I need a council override code, or these pods are nothing but metal coffins." "I am afraid that code will not be provided, Commander." A smooth, cultured voice echoed behind them. Zaire turned, his reptilian eyes widening. Minister Kale, the elegant and seemingly fragile ambassador from the Lumina system, had separated himself from the group. In his pale, trembling hand, he held a concealed weapon. It was not a standard plasma sidearm. It was a restricted anti-particle pistol, a device capable of collapsing the molecular structure of anything it targeted into a micro-singularity. The glowing barrel was aimed directly at the center of Zaire's forehead. "Kale!" the Supreme Ambassador gasped, backing away in sheer terror. "What are you doing?" "I am preserving the dignity of the Galactic Alliance," Kale replied, his voice laced with venomous disgust. "I hired the Invisible Fleet. I transmitted the security override from the council chambers. I had to ensure this tragic incident looked like an external terrorist strike." Kale shifted his furious gaze toward Albert Alexander, who stood perfectly still a few paces away. "It was the only way to stop your integration." Kale spat at the human. "You are savages. Your entire civilization is built on brute force and physical dominance. You do not build great machines to elevate your minds. You weaponize your own flesh. The idea that a primitive, violent species that fights with bare hands would be given a seat at the High Council, sitting as equals with evolved, enlightened civilizations, is an absolute insult to 10,000 years of galactic progress. I will not allow your crude martial arts to pollute our military." Facing the lethal glow of the anti-particle pistol, Albert did not flinch. His heart rate did not spike. He simply tilted his head, his eyes analyzing the minister with the cold, detached precision of a predator sizing up its prey. Albert began to walk. He did not charge forward or dive for cover. He moved in a slow, deliberate, agonizingly smooth arc, circling to Kale's left flank. "Stop moving," Kale commanded, his finger tightening on the trigger mechanism. Albert ignored the order. "You have never held a weapon in your life, Minister," Albert said, his voice entirely devoid of threat, sounding almost conversational. "Your grip is too tight. The barrel is wavering. You are holding your breath because you are terrified of the recoil. You are a politician. You operate through proxy. You pay assassins to do your killing because you lack the physiological resolve to end a life yourself." As Albert spoke, his leather shoes began to strike the metal floor grates with a very specific, deliberate rhythm. A sharp tap, followed by a slight drag, then another tap. The sound echoed strangely in the large, empty transit hub. "Silence!" Kale screamed, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to keep Albert in his sights while maintaining aim on the commander. Albert slightly accelerated the rhythm of his footsteps. Tap, drag, tap, tap, drag, tap. It was a meticulously crafted, auditory illusion. The human was weaponizing the acoustics of the room, creating an overlapping echo that made it sound as though the footsteps were originating from directly behind the minister. Kale's evolved. Highly sensitive auditory processors struggled to reconcile the conflicting data. His eyes saw Albert to his left, but his ears screamed that an enemy was directly behind him. The sheer cognitive dissonance triggered a primal panic response in the alien's brain. In exactly 1/10 of a second, the psychological pressure shattered Kale's focus. His ocular membrane slid shut in a desperate, involuntary blink. That was all the time the human required. Albert exploded from his slow, arcing walk into a blinding sprint. His acceleration was absolute, covering the distance before the minister's eyes even registered the movement. As Kale's eyes snapped open, Albert was already inside his guard. The human's left hand shot upward in a blurring arc, striking the underside of Kale's wrist. The brutal kinetic parry forced the barrel of the anti-particle pistol toward the ceiling, just as Kale reflexively pulled the trigger. A silent beam of dark energy carved a perfect, smoking hole through the roof of the transit hub, missing Zaire by mere inches. Simultaneously, Albert's right hand snaked over Kale's extended arm. With a brutal, twisting motion, the human applied a high-leverage wrist lock, hyperextending the alien's fragile joints past their breaking point. The agonizing pain forced Kale's hand to open completely. The lethal pistol clattered harmlessly to the floor before Kale could even scream. Albert stepped behind his back, sliding his forearm tightly around the minister's throat. He locked his hands together, sinking a flawless chokehold. The pressure entirely cut off the flow of oxygenated blood to Kale's brain. The alien struggled for exactly 4 seconds before his eyes rolled back and his limbs went completely limp. Albert gently lowered the unconscious traitor to the steel floor. He had completely neutralized the greatest internal threat to the Alliance without spilling a single drop of blood, using nothing but footfalls and a profound understanding of biological terror. The lifeless body of Minister Kale had barely settled onto the cold steel grates of the transit hub when the ceiling above them violently detonated. A deafening roar of collapsing metal and pulverized rock shattered the temporary sanctuary. Huge slabs of reinforced plasteel rained down from the upper levels, creating a dense cloud of choking gray dust. Through the settling debris, the true terror of the invisible fleet descended. This was not the stealth infiltration unit they had encountered in the upper halls. This was the Vanguard, the Heavy Siege Division. 24 elite killers dropped into the cavernous station, their landing cracking the floor beneath their immense weight. They were encased in hulking, heavily militarized combat armor, their silhouettes mutated by thick layers of kinetic dampening plating and interlocking ceramic scales. Hydraulic servos whined with terrifying power as they stood upright. Their helmets featured zero optical visors, entirely sealed behind thick domes of pure black sensor arrays. They immediately formed a tight, impenetrable perimeter, completely surrounding the terrified delegation. The low, vibrating hum of their localized sonic disruptors charged the air with a static energy that made Zyra's scales stand on end. Commander Zyre fell to his knees. The massive horn-scale warrior, a veteran of countless brutal campaigns, simply surrendered. He tightly closed his golden eyes, lowering his heavy head in absolute defeat. The human had performed a miracle in the dark caverns against a mindless beast, and he had cleverly outmaneuvered a cowardly politician. But this was reality. This was a fully synchronized, heavily armored execution squad. No amount of primitive martial arts, no matter how precisely calculated, could stop a wall of mechanized death. Flesh and bone, no matter how disciplined, would merely turn into a red mist against such overwhelming, manufactured power. Zyre braced himself for the final acoustic shockwave. He heard the sound of fabric tearing. Zyre opened his eyes just enough to see Albert Alexander stepping forward. The human was not seeking cover. He was not looking for an escape route. Albert casually shrugged off his ruined suit jacket, letting it drop to the contaminated floor. With a sharp, sudden jerk, he ripped the remains of his white dress shirt entirely down the center. He stripped the garment from his torso, revealing a physique that was not overly massive, but possessed a terrifying, functional density. Every muscle fiber looked like tightly coiled steel cable beneath his skin, built purely for explosive leverage and raw torque. Albert calmly tore the ruined shirt into long, even strips. With methodical precision, he began to wrap the fabric tightly around his hands and wrists. He anchored the makeshift bandages around his thumbs, weaving the cloth over his knuckles to compress the fragile metacarpal bones. He was preparing his biological tools for high-impact trauma. The elite assassins raised their heavy gauntlets, their sonic arrays glowing with a lethal purple hue. Albert finished tying off the last strip of fabric on his right hand. He rolled his neck, producing a sharp, cracking sound that cut through the mechanical hum of the room. Then, completely unarmed, stripped to his waist, the human walked directly into the exact center of the armored formation. The squad commander issued a synthetic, barking command. 4 massive assassins lunged at Albert simultaneously from 4 different vectors, their mechanical strength capable of crushing a small ground vehicle. Albert did not brace for impact. He did not block. To block was to accept the force of the enemy. Instead, he became a void. As the first armored giant threw a devastating, pile-driving punch aimed at his skull, Albert seamlessly pivoted on the ball of his foot. He slipped slightly to the outside of the strike, allowing the massive gauntlet to graze past his shoulder by a fraction of an inch. Simultaneously, Albert reached out, his wrapped hands gripping the assassin's heavy forearm. The human did not try to stop the momentum. He accelerated it, dropping his center of gravity. Albert pulled the attacker aggressively forward while adding his own vicious rotational hip toss. The heavy armored killer was sent flying helplessly across the room, crashing violently into 2 of his charging comrades. The sickening crunch of ceramic armor shattering against ceramic armor echoed loudly. Albert moved like a rushing river, navigating a canyon of stones. He was perfectly fluid, constantly shifting his weight, never remaining in a static position for more than a fraction of a second. He existed entirely in the negative space between their attacks. When a second assassin swung a heavy, sweeping backhand, Albert dropped entirely into a low crouch, allowing the blow to sail harmlessly over his head. While still in the crouch, the human launched a sweeping leg kick, violently hooking the back of the assassin's ankle while simultaneously shoving the giant's chest. The enemy fell backward, directly into the path of a third attacker's advancing charge. The highly trained siege unit began to panic. Their targeting computers could not track his erratic, hyperfluid trajectory. They were swinging with enough force to level buildings, But they were only hitting empty air. Or worse, each other. Albert was weaponizing their own numbers and their own colossal momentum against them, turning their tight formation into a chaotic, self-destructing trap. Having completely shattered their structural coordination, Albert shifted from redirection to absolute destruction. He isolated a staggering assassin and closed the distance with terrifying speed. He did not aim for the thickest chest plating or the reinforced helmets. He targeted the mechanical joints. Albert launched himself into the air, executing a brutal, descending axe kick. His heel dropped like a guillotine directly onto the exposed articulation joint of the enemy's kneecap. The synthetic joint snapped backward with a horrific, metallic crack, tearing the primary biological booster pipes entirely out of their sockets. The assassin collapsed, instantly paralyzed from the waist down, landing smoothly from the kick. Albert immediately grabbed the shoulders of another disoriented killer. He pulled the enemy downward while thrusting his own knee upward in a devastating clinch strike. The point of Albert's knee collided perfectly with a hydraulic supply junction located beneath the assassin's armpit. High-pressure fluid erupted in a geyser of green sparks, completely freezing the suit's upper mobility and leaving the occupant trapped inside a rigid, dead shell. The human was a surgical hurricane. He moved from target to target, systematically dismantling the advanced technology with primitive, anatomical violence. A palm strike to a pressure valve, a spinning elbow to a sensory relay, a stomping kick to an ankle actuator. He was not trying to pierce the armor. He was destroying the mechanisms that allowed the armor to move. Zaire watched, utterly paralyzed by awe, as the supposedly invincible army was dismantled piece by piece. Exactly 115 seconds after the ceiling had collapsed, the transit hub fell utterly silent. The deafening hum of the sonic weapons was gone. All 24 of the elite vanguard lay scattered across the steel grates. Their armor was severely dented, their hydraulic fluids leaking, their biometric lines severed. They were groaning in pain, completely immobilized by their own ruined technology. In the center of the mechanical carnage, Albert Alexander stood perfectly upright. His chest heaved with a slow, controlled rhythm, his breathing only slightly heavy from the intense cardiovascular exertion. Small cuts on his shoulders bled slightly where the debris had grazed him, but otherwise, he was entirely unharmed. He slowly unwrapped the bloody, torn fabric from his knuckles, dropping the strips onto the chest of a defeated assassin. The human had not just survived an impossible battle, he had completely dominated it. The silence of the ruined transit hub was shattered by a sound like tearing thunder. The colossal primary blast doors at the far end of the platform did not just open. They were entirely ripped from their heavy hinges, soaring through the air to crash violently against the far wall. Through the swirling dust emerged the supreme leader of the invisible fleet. He was an absolute behemoth, standing twice the height of a normal being, encased in warlord-class dreadnought armor. Every inch of his frame bristled with heavy kinetic shielding and reinforced structural plating. In his massive, gauntleted hands, he carried a devastating weapon. It was a gravitational sonic hammer, a siege tool designed to breach planetary defense bunkers. The head of the hammer pulsed with a concentrated acoustic field capable of pulverizing solid matter into subatomic dust. The giant did not speak. He locked his targeting matrix onto the solitary human standing amidst the wreckage of his elite vanguard. With a terrifying roar of hydraulic engines, the supreme leader charged. He swung the massive hammer down in a brutal, sweeping arc meant to instantly crush Albert into biological paste. Albert dove fiercely to the side, his reflexes pushing his organic limits. The hammer missed the human, slamming directly into the thick steel grates of the transit hub floor. The resulting shockwave was utterly catastrophic. A terrifying wave of localized acoustic pressure exploded outward. The sheer force of the impact shattered the reinforced plasteel platform, violently tearing the metal apart to reveal the ancient, deep crystal chasm over which the station had been built. The concussive blast caught Albert mid-evasion, violently throwing him through the air. He crashed heavily onto the fractured surface. Falling to his knees, the Supreme Leader laughed, a harsh, synthesized distortion of pure malice. He began to stalk forward, swinging the hammer again and again. Each colossal strike missed the human by inches, but the compounding shockwaves ripped the environment apart. Jagged cracks spread like lightning webs across the remaining crystal and metal foundation. Zaire, watching helplessly from the edge of the collapsing platform, felt his heart sink. The human was finally overwhelmed. Albert was scrambling backward, seemingly desperate, entirely outmatched by the raw, apocalyptic destruction of the sonic hammer. But as Zaire watched the human retreat, the Horn-scale commander noticed something profoundly unusual. Albert was not panicking. His breathing was still measured. Even more strangely, he was not looking at the monstrous killer looming over him. Albert was staring intensely at the ground. He was carefully tracking the spreading web of stress fractures radiating from each hammer strike. Zaire realized with a sudden, electrifying shock that Albert was not retreating wildly. He was precisely guiding the Supreme Leader. The human was using his own body as bait, luring the colossal warlord directly toward the absolute weakest structural nexus of the shattered platform. The Supreme Leader reached the designated center. He raised the gravitational sonic hammer high above his head with two hands, the acoustic field whining at maximum capacity to deliver the final execution blow. In that exact, pivotal moment, Albert stopped retreating. He anchored his stance perfectly over the intersecting web of deep fissures, drawing upon the final reserves of his explosive cardiovascular power. The human did not strike at the impenetrable armor of his enemy. Instead, he unleashed a blistering, relentless sequence of driving downward kicks, channeling 100% of his compounded kinetic energy directly into the compromised floor. He became a human pile driver. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Each perfectly executed stomp hit the exact focal point of the structural failure. The alien warlord swung his hammer down, but the ground was simply no longer there. With a deafening, catastrophic groan, the entire central platform gave way. Hundreds of tons of pulverized plasteel and shattered crystal collapsed instantly into the bottomless subterranean void. The Supreme Leader let out a distorted shriek of mechanical terror as his massive, dreadnought-armored body became a fatal anchor. The sheer weight of his invincible suit pulled him down into the lightless abyss, swallowing him entirely. Silence violently rushed back into the cavern, broken only by the sound of crumbling rock. Zaire scrambled toward the jagged edge of the newly formed crater. There, dangling over the terrifying drop, was Albert. The human was gripping a sheer, unbroken edge of the platform with just the muscles in his fingers. His forearms bulged with terrifying tension, his grip strength entirely defying the downward pull of gravity. Zaire reached down with his massive claws, grabbing Albert by the wrist and hauling him safely up onto the solid ledge. The commander looked at the gasping human. "Are you unharmed?" Zaire asked, his voice thick with absolute reverence. "Just a little out of breath, Commander," Albert replied smoothly, calmly brushing the dust from his torn trousers. In that moment, the ultimate, terrifying truth about humanity finally crystallized in Zaire's mind. The most dangerous weapon the humans possessed was not their physical strikes, nor their leverage, nor their hardened bones. It was their terrifying cognitive ability to weaponize the entire universe around them. To a human, a battlefield was not just a place to fight, it was ammunition. 72 hours later, the atmosphere within the newly secured High Council chambers was unrecognizable. The surviving diplomats, having witnessed the absolute limits of their own technology and the salvation offered by primitive flesh, completely abandoned their arrogance. By a unanimous vote, the Galactic Alliance officially granted the Earth delegation Tier 1 strategic privileges. As Albert Alexander stood in his freshly pressed diplomatic suit before the towering alien leaders. The Supreme Ambassador formally bowed his head. He humbly proposed a new galactic directive. He asked Albert to establish the very first interstellar academy for close-quarters combat to teach the galaxy the lost, primal art of human survival. The universe had finally learned that true power did not come from a machine. It came from the mind, the will, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-Fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen. Or click the link in the description box or the pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.